Welcome to a new time. Welcome to a new era.
This ain't WCW. This ain't Monday Night Raw. This ain't SmackDown. This ain't even WWE.
Feel the wrath of the pythons. You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania. This is where the power lies.
And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so.
He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family.
I got a 66 and 2/3 chance of winning because Kurt Angle knows he can't beat me and he's not even going to try.
It's time to step into the squared circle and get it done.
Welcome everybody to the Legends and Champions podcast. I did it again. I almost called it the Squared Circle. I don't know why I'm doing that. Andy Evans here, coming to you, of course, from the United Kingdom. Hope everybody is well and keeping up to date with things and keeping happy and listening to all the podcasts on McGuire on Wrestling and getting ready for Christmas, because we are not that far away now from Christmas. That's a scary thought, isn't it? That's a really scary thought. This week on Legends and Champions, we got a bit of a unique show. We're going to do something slightly different because we are on the road to Christmas and we are on the road now to 2025. I thought I would take a look back at the year that was of 1994. And I'm going to do two shows. So this will be the first show and the second show will be in December. In this one, we're going to look back to the entire year of 1994 for the WWF. We're going to look at what their business plans was like. We're going to look at the biggest moments, and we are then going to focus on the 1994 edition of the Survivor Series, 30 years ago. In December, we're going to do it all over again, but this time we're going to look at WCW. We're going to look at the business. We're going to look at the revenue streams, and we're going to look at the highs, and we're also going to look at Starrcade 1994. So, different shows, but a nice way to round up the year. In between now and Christmas, we have got some that's all, folks. We got some big ones. We got an episode of the A-Team. We got some Baywatch coming up. We got some Star Trek Voyager. Some unique things over the next few weeks. But as always, it's time for this.
We'll make it sweet, we'll make it short. It's time for Andy's Weather Report. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. It never gets old. I love that. Yes, it's time for the weather report. I am currently sat in a hotel room, and it is very cold, very dark, very wet, and not very nice. But it's fine. It's what it is. It's all good. I think you're going to hear this a lot now on the weather report. All right, let's do it. Let's go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we are going to be talking all about 1994 for the World Wrestling Federation. See you after this.
Tried to bury his body.
We are witnessing the demise of The Undertaker.
But they could not bury his soul.
The Undertaker has returned.
Now one man seeks vengeance, and another demands justice be served. Chuck Norris.
This time I'm going to be there, ringside.
Yokozuna.
He is the only man, Undertaker, that has ever laid you to rest.
The Undertaker.
It's time for you to face the Reaper.
From the director of WrestleMania 10 and SummerSlam comes the WWF Survivor Series, live November 23rd on pay-per-view.
Welcome back to Legends and Champions, and let's kick it off by getting ready for the new generation, shall we? Because 1994 was a tough year for the WWE from a business standpoint. Let's look at the different revenue streams that the company were relying on at the time. So we had pay-per-view, live events, merchandise, and TV. And it was these streams that really were the lifeblood of the WWF in 1994, but they were struggling. So if you look at pay-per-view revenue, now we had the pay-per-view events, but back at this time, we only had the big ones. SummerSlam, WrestleMania, the Rumble, Survivor Series, and second year only King of the Ring. So we'd moved up from 4 to 5. And whilst the big shows like WrestleMania 10 and SummerSlam and Survivor Series helped drive income, overall buy rates were significantly down compared to the late 80s. For instance, WrestleMania 10, whilst we consider it to be a success with a 1.68 buy, paled in comparison to the 2 to 3.0 ratings of the Hogan era shows. SummerSlam and Survivor Series failed to reach these numbers, reflecting a fan base that was still adjusting to this whole new generation of stars like the Hitman Bret Hart and Diesel. And the attendance at live events continued to decline, which impacted ticket sales and arena venue. And these days, the WWE can sell out an arena like that, literally by putting tickets, and they're costing an arm and a leg. We know that. We've seen that with Money in the Bank over here, and we've seen that with Survivor Series and in Canada. But back in 1994, the days when the WWF could sell out an arena night after night were gone. Fewer fans were attending house shows, the ticket prices hadn't fully recovered from the 90s slump, and it was really this tough reality check as the in-person attendance figures just couldn't keep up. And when the in-person live event figures aren't there, the knock-on effect is that merchandise sales will also take a hit. And it's no lie that Bret, Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker were popular among wrestling fans. They just didn't have the same crossover appeal as the Macho Man Randy Savage or Hulk Hogan. And without that broader cultural connection, the merchandise just wasn't flying off the shelves as it had been during the heyday of the action figures and the t-shirt craze. And then finally, there's TV. Monday Night Raw was only a year old at this point, and it had gained traction since its debut in January of 1993, but the ratings on USA were nowhere near the levels that were seen with Saturday Night's Main Event. The audience, albeit loyal, was smaller, which meant that advertising revenues weren't as strong. They weren't as tight. They weren't as robust. But TV did remain critical and crucial for promoting the pay-per-views, but it wasn't generating the ad revenue needed to compensate for other losses. And it was due to all of this that the company was in serious decline in profits. The estimated revenue for the WWF in 1994 was around $80 to $85 million. But profits were razor thin, if not negative. And with higher operating expenses, including legal fees from Vince's steroid trial, the company was literally hemorrhaging money. And we're going to get into that in just a second. Because you can't talk about 1994 without addressing the impact of the steroid scandal. Vince was in the middle of this highly publicised trial for steroid distribution, which not only damaged the WWF's reputation, but seriously drained its finances. And the legal and the PR costs of this trial were astronomical. The trial itself came to a head in July of 1994, and while Vince was ultimately acquitted, and you can go back and check out the Vince McMahon show for more details, the damage to the public image of the company had already been done. The sponsors that they had were hesitant to sign up. Advertisers were cautious. The mainstream media coverage was unflattering, all of which added up to this costly distraction for the company. Now, one thing that I don't think many of us really knew at the time was that the WWF faced liquidity issues. Now, what this means in business is that the cash flow was tight. The company wasn't bringing in enough from operations to cover comfortably everyday expenses. As a result, they implemented several cost-cutting measures, including tightening talent contracts, reducing production expenses, and limiting merchandise to avoid excess inventory. This kept the WWF afloat, but the focus was more on survival than expansion. Can you imagine now thinking about, not coming to the UK or not doing an international show in Canada or WWF India or WWF Japan? It doesn't seem real. But back in 1994, this is where we were. You didn't see the World Wrestling Federation outside of North America. They ran standard spots that they knew were going to get them attendance. They run spots that they knew were going to get bums on seats. And really, it's a lot like TNA, because when TNA first kind of kicked off, they were going through the same thing. They didn't have a TV deal. They struggled to get people to buy the pay-per-views when they were weekly. In some ways, they struggled to get people sat on the door. All of this compiled to make a serious profit problem. And they had to rethink quite seriously its approach to business. Because since the 1980s, Vince had been riding this golden wave, right? He'd had Hulk Hogan, he'd had the Macho Man, he'd had the Ultimate Warrior. He'd put on amazing events such as WrestleMania 3, WrestleMania 6. He had that relationship with Trump in terms of running 2 pay-per-views back-to-back at Trump Towers. The buy rates were up. No Holds Barred had come out. Hogan was off doing Suburban Commando and Mr. Nanny. The name was out there. That's all gone. He doesn't have that anymore. His 2 biggest legends have signed or in the process of signing with WCW. The beginning of this exodus is already starting. Eyes are going on another wrestling product, albeit at this point inferior to the WWF. There's still competition. So with the WWF having to rethink its approach, that meant they had to make some difficult decisions. They needed to trim costs, but they couldn't sacrifice its core product, sports entertainment. So they did 3 things. The first was talent contracts and cost control. And this was one of the key areas where the WWF cut back. Wrestlers were no longer receiving high base salaries. Instead, they received a performance-based incentive, which allowed the company to control costs while still giving wrestlers motivation to perform. So basically, they got a share of the gate, depending on how well the gate did. They reduced its production expenses for pay-per-view, going for simpler sets and fewer special effects. And we saw that at the Royal Rumble and at WrestleMania and at SummerSlam. This helped to manage costs, but it also impacted the look and feel to the shows. Instead of the big budget spectacle, they focused more on storytelling and character-driven narratives, which, albeit wasn't necessarily a bad thing for dedicated fans, it might have and was a turn-off for the more casual viewers who were expecting the over-the-top glitz and glamour. Merchandising was scaled back, with the WWF producing limited runs of action figures, shirts, and other products. Marketing also shifted inward, relying heavily on the TV, on Raw, on Superstars, on Challenge, to promote the pay-per-views instead of broad-based advertising campaigns. It saved money, but it limited the ability to reach new audiences. And honestly, it's fair to say that all of these adjustments were necessary to stabilise the company financially, but they also meant that ultimately the WWF were playing it safe rather than aggressively trying to expand or innovate. So how did the fans respond? Well, they were shifting too. The new generation of WWE stars, the Shawns, the Brets, brought a new crop of stars, but they weren't resonating with this broader mainstream audience like Hogan or Savage did. And the TV ratings really did reflect this because, as we said, whilst Monday Night Raw was popular amongst the hardcore fans, it didn't capture the attention of that casual viewer, that lapsed fan, that channel hopper who was going from, I don't know, whatever the channels were in the States at that point. It also didn't capture the fans who once tuned in for the stars like Hulk Hogan. The ratings were respectable, but they weren't the blockbuster numbers that could have driven this high advertising revenue. And without those big numbers, the cash flow from TV markets was limited. The WWF knew that they needed new stars to drive the business forward. And the year of 1994 was all about building up the future main event talent. Those guys that could carry the torch and bring them back. And the three big ones was Diesel, the 7-foot powerhouse, portrayed by Kevin Nash, one of the major breakout stars of 1994. You know, you consider with Kevin Nash what he did. Oz in WCW. Vinny Vegas in WCW, then brought over as the bodyguard of Shawn Michaels. He became a dual champion, holding the Intercontinental and the Tag Team titles. And then, at the end of 1994, he became the WWF champion. He became the symbol of the company's commitment to developing new faces. You know, they weren't going to do what WCW was doing at bringing out the old stars and repackaging them like, you know, the Big Boss Man, I think, had 3 different names, whilst in WCW, Big Bubba Rogers, the Guardian Angel, and there was one more, I can't remember what it was. The Brutus the Barber Beefcake, the Disciple, the Booty Man. In essence, what Diesel was their attempt at creating a new Hulk Hogan. Someone with size, charisma, and this fan-friendly persona to lead the company. But whilst Diesel was being groomed for the future, the Hitman Bret Hart was the present. And the Hitman was the perfect champion for this new era. This workhorse who put on classic matches, connected with the fans, could tell a story in the ring. And he had one of the best feuds in wrestling history with his brother Owen, which both combined emotional depth with incredible ring work. But you gotta think that the one superstar that really changed the landscape was Shawn Michaels and his ascension to the top. Because it was in 1994 really where Shawn started to get recognition. And in part, that was due to the ladder match with Razor Ramon. That match not only put Shawn on the map as a main eventer, but it showcased the ability of the company to innovate in the ring. And with the matches like this, the WWF were proving they could deliver great wrestling, even without the larger-than-life heroes from the past. So with all this in consideration, where did this leave the WWF by the end of 1994? Financially, as we said, it was a tough year, marked by declining profits and the need for cost saving. But strategically, the company laid the foundation for the future. They played the long game. They were focused on storytelling, new characters, and international expansion. The new generation may not have been profitable in 1994, but it was setting the stage for the late 90s boom. And by building up the stars like Diesel, like Bret, like The Undertaker, like Michaels, the WWF were preparing for this new era, even if the immediate financial gains weren't there. The steroid scandal was a setback, but Vince's acquittal in July meant that the company could move forward with a cleaner image. They shifted away from muscle-bound and embraced the more athletic and technically skilled. The clean image would take time to win back sponsors, but it was an important pivot for the future of the company. In a nutshell, 1994 was all about surviving the storm, whilst laying the foundation for this new future. They certainly weren't out of the woods, but they were moving in a new direction with a fresh roster and a more family-friendly brand. Alright, so that's the business side. But what was the event side like? And we're going to touch on that after this.
Hey, yo, how many of you here came to listen to your same generic wrestling podcast? Or how many of you came to listen to the alternate commentary table every single Saturday?
You're going to get our perspective of what the real fans of wrestling think, and no one does it like us.
Subscribe and stream to the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed anywhere where you're streaming your podcasts. Survey says one more for the Greek guys.
Chair shot.
welcome back to the show. As we said, 1994 was a transformative year for the WWF, filled with storyline developments, iconic characters, and memorable moments. Coming off a challenging period in the 1990s, the company leaned into its character-driven, family-friendly approach and doubled down on storytelling, setting the stage for this next evolution. From the meteoric rise of the Hitman, the mystical dominance of the Undertaker, to Diesel's rise as the new face, 1994 was full of ups and downs. So now, let's look at the biggest events and the biggest moments, kicking off with the Royal Rumble. January the 22nd, 1994, kicked off in style in Providence, Rhode Island, where the Hitman Bret Hart and the All-American Lex Luger became the first co-winners of the Royal Rumble. The result sets up this unique, unprecedented situation heading into WrestleMania. But this wasn't the only highlight of this pay-per-view, because we also had The Undertaker facing off against Yokozuna in a casket match. One of the most memorable matches of the year due to the heavy storyline focus and the supernatural elements. Yokozuna, aided by a host of heel wrestlers, managed to defeat The Undertaker, who then ascended to the heavens by Marty Jannetty in one of the most iconic moments of his career. But as good as that was, that, ladies and gentlemen, wasn't the highlight of the pay-per-view. The seeds for one of the most celebrated family feuds in wrestling were sown right here, as the Hitman Bret Hart and the Rocket Owen Hart teamed up to face the Quebecers for the WWF Tag Team titles. But the match ended in disarray. Owen turned on Bret in frustration, starting this brotherly feud that would play out for the remainder of the year. And you're sat there thinking about 1997 with Sting and Hogan. This did it before then. And, you know, I remember watching this match. I remember watching the 1993 Survivor Series, where it was the Hart family against Lawler and Michaels and his Knights. And, excuse me, and when you saw the seeds of dissension, you know, start to be planted by Owen being the only person to be eliminated, and then watching on Superstars and Challenge and Monday Night Raw what was happening with Bret and Owen, and then they walk in united in Providence, you just knew even then that something was going to happen. But it was the promo that took place after. Let's have a listen to the promo.
I tell you, I cannot believe what I just saw, Owen. Please tell me why. Why this despicable act?
Why what?
I don't understand.
You want to know why? Bret Hart, you're nothing but a selfish person. I went in there in a tag team match for the biggest match of my life. It was a dream come true. I thought I had the best partner in the world, my own brother. But you're too selfish, like I've said all along. Your ego is too big. You only worry about yourself, Bret. You don't care about me.
Unbelievable in front of your entire family.
I don't care about anybody. I was concerned about myself and my whole family. The biggest opportunity in my life. I had a chance, Bret, and you stripped it away from me. You took it away from me, Bret, because you're too selfish. All you had to do was just tag me. My hand was there. Just tag me. I knew your leg was bad. I was aware of that. Just tag me. But you're too selfish. You just want to put your sharpshooter on. I could have won the match. I don't need you with a bad leg doing it, Bret. You're too damn selfish, and that's why you're sitting there with a bad leg, and that's why I kicked your leg out of your leg.
Owen, let me ask you something. You've obviously cost Bret a shot at the championship. There's no way he's going to be able to compete in the Royal Rumble match coming up tonight. Don't you think that was selfish on your part?
There's no selfishness in me. There's not a selfish bone in my body. He cost himself the WWF Tag Team belts, and he cost me, his little brother, a guy that's never had the taste of a WWF belt before. He's done it before. He doesn't care about me. He just worries about himself. I don't care about you in the Royal Rumble, Bret, because this is my opportunity. I'm in it too. I'm not worried about you getting cost the WWF belt. I'm worried about myself. And I'm going to get that belt because I didn't get a chance to win the tag belts because of you, but I can count on myself and I'll take the WWF belt. I'll win that Royal Rumble.
Let's go back to ring.
I mean, it was just a killer promo, right? It was absolutely fantastic. And this is when, okay, you had the faux pas. You had Owen kind of saying the leg a few too many times. I kick your leg out from underneath your leg. But that just added to the emotion. They were really playing off the fact this had literally just happened. And, when you're watching this on pay-per-view, you can see they're playing the interview with Owen on the Titantron, and Bret is being wheeled out on the gurney. And this really did kind of set the scene for what was going to happen in that main event at the Royal Rumble. Was Bret going to make it in? Was Owen going to take him out? We had a couple of moments, I think, where the Bastion Booger wasn't in, and the countdown, and it went, and then nobody came out. And the announcers were really selling the fact of, is that Bret? Was that Bret? But ultimately, Bret did come out, and we had the double finish. And that double finish was the first time it has ever happened in the WWF, but it built tension heading into WrestleMania. Lex and Bret both wanted the title, but this setup also left room for Owen Hart to challenge his brother, creating this complex web of storylines leading to WrestleMania 10, and that is exactly where we are going now. March the 20th, 1994, at Madison Square Garden, WrestleMania celebrated the 10th anniversary and was a massive night for the World Wrestling Federation. It was a critical success with two iconic matches that elevated the in-ring standard of the World Wrestling Federation. The opening match, the Hitman Bret Hart facing off against Owen. It was a showcase. It was a technical showcase that would go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, WrestleMania match of all time. Owen getting the clean win, solidifying himself as a legitimate threat and deepening their sibling rivalry. And do you know what I loved about this one was when the ring announcer did the introduction, making his way to the ring from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. The crowd went absolutely nuts. You could feel Madison Square Garden lifting from the rafters. And then Owen Hart, and the crowd just flipped straight down to a massive chorus of boos. It was, just by doing that, it was brilliant. It legitimately made Owen the biggest heel at that point. Now, I've been involved in the industry and people know that. And I got two friends, Scott and Joe, they're a tag team over here called the Brothers Orr. And the victory roll finish, where Owen is on Bret's shoulders and then small packages him in, gets the victory roll, gets the 3. It's called the Owen maneuver. And wrestlers try to find a way to bring that into a match, to give it that unique ending, and to give a pop back to Owen Hart. And I remember watching it, and if you think about 20 years later when the Undertaker streak was ended by Brock Lesnar, and the look of shock in the crowd, I just remember sitting there as a wee bonny little lad, thinking, Bret's never going to lose to Owen. I want Bret. And then Owen got it, and I was sat there going, my God, Owen just beat the Hitman. Owen has just beaten Bret the Hitman Hart. What the hell is going to happen going into the main event? We didn't have long to wait. The other iconic match, and we're not going to go into detail on this one because I think we've talked about this enough in the archives, was Shawn versus Razor in the ladder match. But I want to talk about the double title match. Yokozuna, Lex Luger, and then Bret the Hitman Hart facing off against Yokozuna. Because for some reason, and I don't know why, Vince never wanted to pull the trigger on Lex Luger. He had opportunities multiple times to put the World Wrestling Federation Championship on Luger. SummerSlam 1993 would have been the most obvious location, but it didn't happen. And again here, it didn't happen, and it would have led to this dream match between the Hitman and Lex Luger. What we had though, which was, I suppose, quite clever, is we had the rematch from WrestleMania 9. Because at WrestleMania 9, Yokozuna defeated Bret to become the World Wrestling Federation champion, and then Hogan came in and won it 30 seconds later. This got Bret's revenge. And there was this iconic scene where all of the roster come out and they lift Bret the Hitman Hart up on their shoulders. And the last person you see on shot is Owen Hart in the aisle with the Macho Man signaling for Owen to come into the ring. And he didn't do it. And it went to black. Beautiful way to finish the pay-per-view. Because that, at that point, made Owen Hart the top heel in the organization. And really set the stage for what was going to happen. But more than not, this showed that the company were clearly transitioning away from the Hogan era into this new generation, led by these more athletic but smaller performers. So WrestleMania is done, the Rumble's done. Now where are we going? We are heading to Baltimore, Maryland, June the 19th, 1994, the second annual King of the Ring, which continues Owen's crusade. He became the King of Hearts. It legitimized his heel status. It positioned him as top contender in the WWF. But what it also did was continue this I'm coming out of your shadow storyline. Because it was a year earlier, in 1993, at King of the Ring, which saw the Hitman become the first ever King of the Ring. Well, the first ever on pay-per-view. You know, it'd been running for decades. But now, Owen has beat the Hitman. Owen has become King of the Ring. What is next? Owen defeated Razor Ramon in the tournament final, giving him the title shot at SummerSlam. The Hitman Bret Hart retained the WWF Championship due to interference from Jim Neidhart when he went up against Diesel. But what that did was that set the seeds for Kevin Nash and for the Diesel character as a future main event. And we will be covering King of the Ring in more detail next year. But Owen Hart's King of the Ring win cemented him as this top heel. It reinforced the claim, as we said, he was the better Hart. And Diesel's rapid rise also continued. The King of the Ring pushed the trend of new stars as we continue on this new generation era. It's August 29th, 1994. We're at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois for SummerSlam, highlighted by family drama, championship clashes, and the ongoing rise of Diesel. This one, not only was it a cracking pay-per-view, but it's also notable because it was the last appearance of the Macho Man Randy Savage in the World Wrestling Federation before joining WCW. And bear in mind, Savage wasn't even on commentary. He was the host. He came out for 30 seconds. Yeah. What a way to go, Macho. And it's a shame because the Macho Man Randy Savage was just phenomenal, right? It also was known for the Undertaker versus Undertaker. Because back at the Royal Rumble, as we'd already talked about, the Undertaker descended into the heavens. But it wasn't the Undertaker, it was Marty Jannetty. Again, referencing that. Ted DiBiase, who originally brought the Undertaker back in 1990 at the Survivor Series, claimed to have found him. Claimed to have found the missing Undertaker. It was really Brian Lee portraying an imposter. But because of those altercations, because of that announcement, the WWF brought in the Naked Gun, Leslie Nielsen, to run a whole series of skits on The Undertaker, which culminated at SummerSlam with Paul Bearer returning to the ring with the real Undertaker and Brian Lee as the fake Undertaker going one-on-one. It was a pretty good match, but, you know, it was a bad angle, and the fans and critics absolutely detested it because of how bad it was, which is a shame because, you know, I thought it was unique. I thought it was a bit of a comedy, but it wasn't a good storyline, and you could clearly see the difference in height between Mark Calloway and Brian Lee, which also didn't help for the fact. The other big thing coming out of this was Diesel, because they continued this mega push Diesel, who accompanied by Shawn, retained the Intercontinental Championship in a match against Razor Ramon and won the tag team titles, setting him up as a dual champion and continuing to build his popularity. Keep this in mind, because this will play a very big part at the Survivor Series. But the one that we were really waiting for, the one match that made SummerSlam, was Bret versus Owen 2, this time in a steel cage. And it was a classic. Absolute classic. With Bret narrowly escaping the cage for the win. The match was praised by everybody for its storytelling. The family drama surrounding the Hart family really kept the fans emotionally invested. We also saw the return of the Anvil, Jim Neidhart. We saw the return of the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. It was everything you ever wanted in a steel cage match. And what I love about it is it's the old cage. It's the blue cage with the big bars. Oh, it's amazing. I miss that cage. That cage was just tremendous. Why don't they bring that back? I love that cage. Not like this new one that they got. Anyway. We came out of the hottest party of the summer excited for what was going to happen next. Just because Owen lost this match, it didn't take anything away from him. It established Bret as the champion. It established Owen as the top heel. Diesel continued to grow. The Undertaker versus Undertaker was gone, dropped. Well, what was the need for it? And that brings us to where we are today. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we are looking at the Survivor Series 1994. We'll see you after this.
It is live, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get past the crowd in the Providence Civic Center enjoying the Royal Rumble matchup. You have to do everything you can to win the Royal Rumble. The winner goes to WrestleMania. Diesel is cleaning house. Randy Savage, a house of fire. Look at this. Oh, my goodness. Max Luger determined to get a title shot somehow. And look at that. Wait a minute. It's Max Luger. One of these men will go to WrestleMania. It's Luger. Luger threw Bret Hart out.
No, I don't know. Look, the referees are arguing. They can't make up their mind. I don't think they know.
The winners are Lex Luger and Bret Hart.
The question remains, who will go to WrestleMania and face the champion?
Alright, we are back with more of 1994, and we're rolling back the clock to one of the most memorable pay-per-views of the 90s, the Survivor Series, an event that not only featured intense matches and iconic characters, but set the stage for pivotal storylines in the months to follow. We're talking obviously about Undertaker versus Yoko in the casket match, Bret defending the championship against Bob Backlund, and much, much more. So let's sit tight. Let's break down the matches, let's look at the reception, and let's look at the long-term impact of this iconic event. And Survivor Series took place on November the 23rd, 1994 at the Threeman Coliseum in San Antonio, Texas. At that point, it was the 8th installment of the pay-per-view, and as always, promised a mix of traditional elimination and intense singles matches. As we've talked about throughout this show, the WWE were embracing more character-driven, storyline-heavy approaches, and the event was critical as it featured two of the biggest draws of that time, The Undertaker and The Hitman, in major matches. Alright, the event kicked off with a Survivor Series elimination match. It was the bad guys, Razor Ramon, the 1-2-3 Kid, the Bulldog, Fatu, and Sione, who was the Barbarian, facing off against the Teamsters, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Jeff Jarrett, Ain't I Great, J-E-F-F-J-A-R-R-E-T-T, Owen Hart, and Jim Neidhart. I'm so sorry. It got a 3.5 rating from Dave Meltzer. And this match opened the Survivor Series. It was an entertaining contest. It showcased some of the best mid-card and tag talent the WWE had to offer, but there were some key moments coming out of here. Diesel's dominance. He was the standout performer of the heel team. You know, he used his size, his power to eliminate multiple members of the opposing team, creating this exciting dynamic. But it was the escalation of the feud between him and Shawn Michaels that really got you going, because tension had been brewing between these two for months. Michaels accidentally, in inverted commas, hit Diesel with Sweet Chin Music. Diesel snapped, chased Michaels to the back, and it led to the entire Teamsters faction being counted out, giving the bad guys the victory. Now, what we didn't mention at the top of the show was at the Royal Rumble, the way Diesel was eliminated was by accidentally, in inverted commas, being eliminated by Shawn Michaels. See how the WWE very cleverly are bringing storylines back together. This match was crucial for one thing. It was advancing this storyline between Michaels and Diesel. It needed to happen because it would propel him to the main event scene. Meltzer praised the match for its entertaining storytelling and strong character work, especially highlighting Diesel's role in setting up his singles career. After that, we moved to another Survivor Series elimination match. I kind of wish we hadn't. It was Clowns Are Us, Doink, Dink, Pink and Wink versus the Royal Family, Jerry Lawler, Cheesy, Sleazy and Queasy. Yeah, you got a half star from Mr. Meltzer. The match, it's what it was, right? It was comedy, and it was meant to break the action. The match saw Doink and his team of mini clowns facing off against Jerry Lawler and his own miniature allies, all of which came out dressed like the king. It was built entirely around humour, sight gags, heel face antics, rather than traditional wrestling. But the small-sized teammates, Cheesy, Sleazy and Queasy, tried to provide comic relief, but it wasn't received well by the live crowd or by the critics. It mostly consisted of clownish antics, I guess it would have got Doink the Clown in it, with little real wrestling or suspense. Lawler's team ultimately picked up the victory after Doink was eliminated and his mini team were outnumbered. The match ended with Lawler gloating over his victory, only to be turned on by his own teammates in a comedic post-match segment. And let's be frank, right? It didn't have any impact on storylines. Nobody would have cared if this match was in there. Meltzer gave it one of the lowest ratings of the night, criticising it as filler that distracted from the pacing and the quality of the event. Next up was a match that got 4.5 stars. It was one of the most memorable and emotionally intense matches of the night. The submission match for the WWF Championship featured the Hitman Bret Hart defending his title against Bob Backlund. Now, if you were a fan of technical wrestling and psychological drama, this was the match for you, and it still holds up today. Each wrestler attempted to wear down the other and force a submission. Family members, Owen and Davey Boy, added layers of tension as they played pivotal roles in the match's climax. But what made this match great was the psychological storytelling. The match was slow. You weren't going to get hurricanranas or enziguris or flying drop kicks or Jeff Hardy style maneuvers. What you got was two men who knew the business, who knew how to tell a story whilst using a chin lock or an armbar, putting on a masterclass. In Backlund, who was, this Mr. Backlund character and was quite generic, really. He was the typical creator wrestler on WWE 2K. No sort of character, no sort of image, no sort of attitude, no sort of look, just a pair of red trunks. It's the default character you get when you do core. Snapped and changed. But what this match did was it literally, again, showcased how to break somebody down piece by piece. Imagine getting a chicken don't know where I'm going with this. Imagine getting a chicken and getting a butcher's knife. And when you break down a chicken, you take the wings off, you take the legs off, you take the breast off, and you've got this tray full of chicken pieces and the chicken carcass. When you get a fish and you gut it, you debone it, you take the pin bones out, you cut the head off, you're breaking it down. And that's what they did. They were setting each other up for their respective moves. Bret working on the legs for the sharpshooter, Backlund working on the arms for the chicken wing crossface. It added this unique tension that built throughout the match. But the other X factor here was Owen, because his manipulative heel tactics were really just there. When Davey accidentally got injured outside the ring, Owen feigned concern for his brother Bret. He convinced Helen Hart to throw the towel in on Bret's behalf, costing him the championship. A throwback to when Arnold Skoland did that to Bob Backlund, and it cost him the championship against the Iron Sheik. This one move, this one thing, emphasised Owen's willingness to betray his family for personal gain and positioned Backlund as this unhinged champion. But, shockingly, it only lasted for a few days, as Diesel would defeat him for the championship at MSG. And at that point, Diesel became the first person to ever hold all 3 championships at that time in one calendar year. Intercontinental, Tag Team, and finally the WWF Championship, rocking into 1995 as the face of the company. This match remains a classic of long-term storytelling. It further deepened the Hart family feud, which would carry on for years. You may not get this intense matches like you did throughout 1994, but it was brewing underneath. They would touch on it throughout 1995, 1996, right the way up to 1997 when they became the Hart Foundation. Dave Meltzer praised the match for its dramatic storytelling and the intensity of the finish, though he did acknowledge that the slower pace might not be for everyone's taste. Me personally, I loved it. I thought the match was brilliant. I thought they paced it really well. I thought they placed it well on the card. I thought they gave them enough time without going over. And I would agree that, it was a classic. And it is the highlight of Survivor Series. And it's a must-watch for fans of psychological wrestling. So whilst we've still got the network, I would suggest that you go out and you watch this match. Next up was another Survivor Series elimination match. It was Guts and Glory. The Made in the USA, Lex Luger, Mabel, Adam Bomb, and the Smoking Guns, Billy and Bart, facing off against the $1 Million Team, Native American Tatanka, King Kong Bundy, Bam Bam Bigelow, and the Heavenly Bodies. Meltzer gave it 2.5 stars. And this elimination match featured Luger's team of Guts and Glory against the $1 Million Team. The in-ring work was solid, but it didn't capture the crowd's excitement the way the earlier elimination match did. Each performer had a chance to showcase some of their moves, but the structure was more traditional and ultimately lacked the intensity of other matches on the card. And I think when you've gone from one classic psychological match before that straight into this, which is very similar, I don't think you're going to... You need something to bring the crowd up, right? You need something to make the crowd pop, get them re-energized, ready for your main event, and this didn't work. There were a couple of key moments that came out of this. King Kong Bundy's dominance. Now, bear in mind, Bundy was a main event performer in the 1980s, was back in the World Wrestling Federation as part of the $1 Million Team. $1 Million Corporation was going to have a feud with Kamala in 1995. But at this point, he was presented as the unstoppable powerhouse. And that furthered him as the top heel in the stable. What was also intriguing about this was the heels triumphed. And Tatanka and Bundy emerged as the sole survivors after eliminating Luger, who was the last remaining member. What we haven't talked about already is why Native American Tatanka was a heel. Because at SummerSlam, him and Luger had a match where it came out that one of them had sold out to Ted DiBiase. Tatanka was adamant it was Lex Luger. Lex Luger kept saying, mate, no, it's not me. It wasn't me. I haven't done it. I wouldn't do that. In the end, it came out that it was Tatanka that had joined DiBiase, had sold out, and for the first time in his career, had gone heel. Dave Meltzer gave this match a modest rating, noting that while it was entertaining, it lacked the intensity of the opener and Bret Backlund. It did serve as a filler, but it didn't add much to the night's narrative. Which then brings us to the main event. The Undertaker versus Yokozuna 2 in a casket match. This time with Special Enforcer Chuck Norris. 1994, the year of Walker, Texas Ranger. He was all over USA at that point. He was one of the biggest stars of TV and film, you know, coming off the Delta Force 2, whatever. Chuck Norris was known as a legitimate tough guy. And that's what they needed in this match, because at the Royal Rumble, every man and his dog got involved. Every heel in that company helped to put The Undertaker out. It was also where The Undertaker had lost in 1994 in his own match, and this time he was there to seek revenge. The Undertaker dominated most of this match, showcasing that signature no-sell style and intimidating presence. The storyline payoff was enhanced, however, by his relentless pursuit of victory, seemingly unaffected by Yokozuna. Chuck had some great moments in this match. He prevented interference from heels such as Jeff Jarrett. He kept the match clean. He did what he said he was going to do on the tin, and he added a sense of spectacle. When King Kong Bundy and the Beast from the East, Bam Bam Bigelow, teased getting involved, Norris kept them at bay. The superstars legitimately sold it as though they were scared to death of Chuck Norris. The match ended Yokozuna's main event push and allowed The Undertaker to continue to evolve his character, setting him up for future heels. He would go into a feud next. Who would he go into a feud next with? No, I got it wrong. The King Kong Bundy would go into a feud with The Undertaker after he had a feud with Kama. Wow. Okay. Meltzer gave it a fair rating. He said that while it was entertaining for fans of The Undertaker's gimmick, it did lean heavily on the spectacle over substance. But it was a memorable and fitting conclusion to the pay-per-view. Both Dave and critics viewed Survivor Series as a mixed bag. Their standout matches obviously were Bret versus Backlund for its storytelling, the bad guys for the Teamsters for its dramatic finish and feud setup. But the other matches were just seen as a filler. The main event was this satisfying payoff for Undertaker fans, but leaned too much on gimmick rather than quality. So how could you summarise Survivor Series? It was memorable. It helped shape the landscape for what 1995 was going to become. It promenaded Diesel into his rise. It further elevated the feud between Bret and Owen. Undertaker was still dominant. It set up future storylines. It set up championship changes that would define an era. And even though some moments may have fallen flat, the main stories are still remembered by fans and critics as pivotal moments in wrestling history.
If you like McGuire on Wrestling. You need to subscribe to the free McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed. Not only do you get access to the show a day early, but you also get free bonus content every week. Share a laugh with Mitch and Dimitri on the alternate commentary table.
Oh, I'm Cody Brown. Look at me.
Now, if this was Damian Priest, he'd apologize.
He probably would have apologized.
Follow along with the film career of one of wrestling's biggest stars with We've Seen a Movie.
Basically, I'm just watching John Cena play his wrestling character.
If John Cena was a raging alcoholic at Atlantic City, mooch before this.
Get all these shows, exclusive interviews, and more for free by subscribing to McGuire on Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts.
And that's it for this edition of Legends and Champions. I hope you've enjoyed our look back to 1994, a look of the challenges, the strategic changes, the foundational issues that they would have had to affected. It may not have been profitable, but it was one that really did set the stage for what Monday Night Wars and what the wrestling boom that would come later in the decade. So that's the first of two shows. In December, as I said, we're going to be looking at WCW. We're going to do the same thing again, this time focusing on WCW and ending up with Starrcade. If you haven't already, check out Team MOW on Facebook. All you need to do is go to facebook.com and search for Team MOW. Become part of the community. Interact with me, Mike, Joe, Mitch, Dimitri, and the rest of the team and the rest of the community. It's great over there. Really enjoying being part of that Facebook group. You can keep up to date with all of the action, all of the podcasts, by searching for McGuire on Wrestling on all main podcast providers, and you can subscribe. That way you get every show as they're released, dropped into your lap. On a Saturday, we have the wonderful Greek World Order, Mitch and Dimitri, with the alternate commentary table. Sundays, it's Mike back with McGuire on Wrestling with Dave Meltzer. We've also got I Seen a Movie with Mike and Joe, dropping as and when. And of course, you've got me with Legends and Champions each and every midweek treat. So there is really something for everyone, and I would encourage you all to subscribe if you haven't and check it out, McGuireOnWrestling.com. And that really is it for me for this week, except to say thank you for joining me. Hope you've enjoyed this look back, and I will see you next week for more Legends and Champions. Until then, stay safe. See you at the matches. Bye-bye now.
This has been Legends and Champions with Andy Evans. Thank you for listening.